January 19, 2010. Irene Rosenfeld stood before the cameras and made a promise. The American CEO of Kraft Foods, fresh from her £11.5 billion hostile takeover of Cadbury, looked directly into the lens and spoke the words that would define corporate betrayal for a generation. "We have no plans to close the Somerdale factory." 83 days later, she shut it down. 400 workers, 150 years of chocolate-making expertise, gone. The machinery was dismantled, packed into containers, and shipped 1,000 miles east to Poland, where labor cost £4 an hour instead of £12. Rosenfeld never apologized. She never explained. When pressed by furious MPs in Parliament, she simply stated that circumstances had changed. The workers who had spent decades tempering chocolate, who could tell the quality of a batch by sound alone, who had trained their children and grandchildren in the craft, received redundancy letters by post. This is not where the story begins. But it is where Britain realized what had happened. The sale of Cadbury wasn't a business transaction, it was a cultural amputation. George Cadbury bought 14.5 acres of land 4 miles south of Birmingham city center in 1879. He paid £7,000. The location was deliberate, far enough from the smoke and filth of industrial Birmingham, close enough to the railway lines that connected Britain to the world. He built a factory. Then he built something stranger. Around the factory, George Cadbury constructed an entire village, not workers' tenements, not slums with outdoor privies and shared pumps. Houses, real houses, with gardens, bathrooms, running water. He called it Bourneville, named after the Bourne Brook that ran through the land. Each house had a front garden of at least 6 feet and a back garden of at least 150 feet. No pub was ever built in Bourneville. George was a Quaker, a teetotaler, and he believed that drink destroyed working families. Instead, he built schools, parks, swimming baths, a hospital, and a recreation ground with tennis courts and cricket pitches. Critics called it paternalism. George called it fairness. "Capitalism without conscience," he wrote in 1912, "is a crime against humanity." By 1900, Cadbury employed 2,600 people. The company produced 200 varieties of chocolate and cocoa. Workers received pensions, medical care, education grants for their children, and half-day Saturdays. Women were paid 75% of men's wages, which was revolutionary at the time. The average life expectancy of a Bourneville resident was 8 years longer than the Birmingham average. The chocolate itself was different too. Cadbury's Dairy Milk, launched in 1905, contained more milk than any competitor's bar. The recipe was a closely guarded secret known only to 6 people at any given time. The taste was distinctive, creamy, sweet, less bitter than Swiss or Belgian chocolate. It became the flavor of British childhood. By 1914, Cadbury was the largest chocolate manufacturer in the British Empire. The purple wrapper became synonymous with quality, with trust, with Britishness itself. The Cadbury family ran the company for 124 years, 4 generations. George Cadbury died in 1922, but his sons carried the mission forward, then their sons, then theirs. But by the 1960s, a problem emerged. The Quaker bloodline was thinning. Fewer Cadbury descendants wanted to run a chocolate factory. They wanted to be artists, doctors, academics. The family fortune had grown so large that none of them needed to work. In 1969, Cadbury merged with Schweppes, the drinks company. The logic seemed sound: diversification, shared distribution networks, expansion into new markets. But the merger diluted the family's control. The Cadburys became minority shareholders. Accountants replaced chocolatiers in the boardroom. Cadbury Schweppes grew. It acquired Sunkist, Canada Dry, Dr. Pepper, Snapple, and hundreds of smaller brands. Revenue climbed to £7.9 billion by 2007, but something fundamental shifted. The company stopped being about chocolate. It became about quarterly earnings, shareholder value, and return on investment. In 2008, Cadbury Schweppes split. The drinks business became a separate American company. Cadbury plc emerged as a pure confectionery firm once again, with annual revenues of £5.4 billion and operations in 60 countries. On paper, the demerger made sense. It unlocked shareholder value. The stock price rose 12% in the first quarter. But it also made Cadbury vulnerable. Suddenly, the company was small enough to be swallowed whole, and across the Atlantic, Irene Rosenfeld was watching. Kraft Foods was an American colossus. It owned 50 brands with revenues exceeding $1 billion each. Philadelphia cream cheese, Oreo biscuits, Maxwell House coffee, Oscar Mayer meats. Annual turnover, $42 billion. Workforce, 98,000 people across 70 countries. But Kraft had a problem. Growth had stalled. American consumers were abandoning processed foods. Obesity lawsuits threatened profits. The company needed expansion, and Europe was the target. Irene Rosenfeld became CEO in 2006. She was 53, a graduate of Cornell and Stanford, a former consultant at McKinsey. Her mandate was simple: increase shareholder value by any means necessary. In August 2009, Kraft made an initial offer, £10.2 billion for Cadbury. The Cadbury board rejected it immediately. Chairman Roger Carr called it derisory. The bid valued Cadbury at 720 pence per share. Carr believed the company was worth at least 850 pence. Rosenfeld responded by going hostile. She appealed directly to shareholders, bypassing the board entirely. She increased her offer to £11.5 billion, or 840 pence per share. She promised to preserve British jobs, to honor Cadbury's heritage, to maintain the Bournville factory as a center of excellence. She promised to keep Somerdale open. The battle lasted 5 months. Politicians intervened. Prime Minister Gordon Brown called the takeover unacceptable. Business Secretary Peter Mandelson demanded guarantees. Union leaders marched through Birmingham with banners reading, "Hands off our Cadbury." But British law was clear. Directors had a fiduciary duty to shareholders, not to workers or communities. If Kraft offered enough money, the board had to capitulate. On January 19, 2010, Cadbury's board recommended acceptance. Rosenfeld had won. The workers at Somerdale, who had already been told the factory would close under Cadbury's own restructuring plan, were relieved. Kraft had promised to reverse the decision. The American giant had saved their jobs. 83 days later, Kraft announced that Somerdale would close anyway. The reversal was no longer feasible. The machinery went to Poland. What happened next was systematic dismemberment. Within 18 months, Kraft sold Cadbury's Australian beverage division for $192 million. Then the European gum business for $219 million. Then the Argentinian distribution network. Then the South African factories. Each sale generated cash. None of that cash was reinvested in Britain. Instead, it paid down the debt Kraft had incurred to buy Cadbury in the first place. Kraft had borrowed $9 billion to finance the takeover. It used Cadbury's own assets to pay off the loan. The headquarters at Bournville was downgraded. Senior management positions were eliminated. Research and development budgets were slashed. The historic chocolate recipe archive, containing formulas dating back to 1824, was digitized and sent to Kraft's facility in Illinois. In 2012, Kraft split itself into 2 companies. The North American grocery business kept the Kraft name. The global snacks division, which included Cadbury, became a new entity, Mondelez International. Mondelez, a made-up word, derived from the Latin mundus, world, and a variant of delicious. It meant nothing. It sounded like nothing. It was the corporate erasure of identity. Cadbury's purple logo remained, but the ownership chain became incomprehensible. A British brand, founded by Quakers in Birmingham, was now a subsidiary of an American multinational headquartered in Illinois, managed by executives who had never tasted dairy milk before the acquisition. In 2017, Mondelez changed the dairy milk recipe. The modification was subtle, but unmistakable. The company replaced some of the cocoa butter with palm oil and reduced the milk content by 2%. The change saved approximately $14 million per year in raw material costs. British consumers noticed immediately. The chocolate felt different in the mouth. It melted slower. The taste had a waxy quality that hadn't been there before. Social media erupted with complaints. Blind taste tests confirmed the difference. Mondelez denied changing anything. A spokesperson stated that the quality and recipe of Cadbury dairy milk remains unchanged. But ingredient labels told a different story. The words palm oil appeared where they hadn't before. Chocolate experts confirmed what consumers suspected. Professor Richard Tiffin of the University of Reading analyzed samples purchased in 2015 and 2018. The 2018 version contains approximately 8% less milk fat and 12% more vegetable fat, he concluded. This alters both the texture and the flavor profile. Mondelez eventually admitted to minor adjustments, but insisted the changes were imperceptible to most consumers. Sales data suggested otherwise. Dairy Milk's market share in the UK dropped from 23% in 2016 to 19% in 2019. The recipe that George Cadbury had protected for generations, that had defined British chocolate for over a century, had been altered to save pennies per bar. Bob Henderson worked at Bournville for 41 years. He started in 1969 as an apprentice engineer, fresh from technical college, earning £9 a week. He retired in 2010, 3 months after the Kraft takeover, with a pension and a severance package. The day they announced the sale, Bob recalls, the floor went silent, not angry, just silent. We knew what it meant. You could feel 130 years of history drain out of the building. Bob specialized in tempering machines, the devices that heat and cool chocolate, to give it that perfect snap when you break a bar. Tempering is an art, he explains. You're manipulating the crystal structure of cocoa butter. Get it wrong by 2 degrees and the chocolate blooms, goes white and crumbly. We had workers who could tell the temperature by touch. After Kraft, those workers were made redundant. The new management brought in automated systems that required minimal human oversight, cheaper, more efficient. The chocolate still passed quality control, but it lacks something Bob can't quite articulate. It's like the difference between a photograph and a painting, he says. Technically accurate, but soulless. Mary Griffith spent 33 years in the packing department. She wrapped Easter eggs by hand in the 1980s before automation. We took pride in our work, she says. If an egg left my station with a crooked ribbon, that was my reputation. Sounds daft now, but it mattered. Mary was 56 when Kraft closed her line. She received £18,000 in redundancy pay and 3 months' notice. She never worked again. They said I could retrain, she laughs bitterly. Retrain as what? I'd spent 33 years wrapping chocolate. That was my skill. In 2013, Reuters uncovered Mondelez's tax structure. The company had restructured Cadbury's European operations to route profits through Switzerland and the Netherlands, jurisdictions with minimal corporate tax rates. The scheme was legal, but morally corrosive. Cadbury UK reported revenues of £1.2 billion, but paid only £12 million in corporation tax, an effective rate of 1%. The company achieved this by paying licensing fees to a Swiss subsidiary for the use of the Cadbury brand name. In essence, Cadbury UK was paying Cadbury Switzerland for the right to use its own name. The fees were calculated to eliminate almost all taxable profit in Britain, shifting the money to Switzerland where it was taxed at 4%. Margaret Hodge, chair of the Public Accounts Committee, called it morally repugnant. She hauled Mondelez executives before Parliament. They insisted they were complying with all applicable tax laws. That's not the point, Hodge snapped. You're a British company, founded in Britain, employing British workers, selling to British customers, and you're paying less tax than a corner shop. The executives had no answer. They repeated their script about legal compliance and shareholder obligations. The hearing ended with Hodge declaring Mondelez's behavior an insult to British people. Public pressure forced Mondelez to restructure again in 2016. The company began paying more UK tax, but the damage was done. Cadbury, once a model of corporate responsibility, was now synonymous with exploitation. The Bournville factory still operates. It employs approximately 1,000 people, down from 7,000 in the 1970s. Most of the workforce is agency staff on temporary contracts. Wages start at £9.50 per hour with no benefits. The village of Bournville remains beautiful. The houses, still owned by the Bournville Village Trust, are meticulously maintained. The gardens bloom in spring. Children play cricket on the recreation grounds George Cadbury built in 1895. But the connection between the village and the factory has been severed. Most Bournville residents no longer work for Cadbury. They can't afford to. The houses once allocated to workers at below-market rents now rent at market rates. A 3-bedroom Bournville cottage costs £1,400 per month, far beyond the reach of a Cadbury agency worker. The factory itself is a fortress now. High fences, security gates, CCTV cameras. Visitors are no longer welcome. The famous Cadbury World attraction, which once offered tours of the working factory, now shows only a sanitized museum version of chocolate making. Inside, the production lines run 24 hours a day, monitored by computers. The tempering machines Bob Henderson once tended are operated remotely from a control room in Warsaw. The Easter eggs Mary Griffiths wrapped are packaged by robots. In 2021, Mondelez announced plans to invest £15 million in Bourneville. The press release emphasized innovation, sustainability, and commitment to the UK. The investment amounted to less than 0.05% of Mondelez's annual revenue. The Kraft takeover of Cadbury destroyed more than jobs. It severed a 186-year relationship between a company and a place, between capital and responsibility, between profit and purpose. George Cadbury believed that business success obligated owners to care for their workers. He built Bourneville not as charity but as moral duty. When he made millions from chocolate, he didn't extract wealth. He embedded it in the community through houses, schools, parks, and pensions. Kraft recognized no such obligation. To Rosenfeld and her successors, Cadbury was a portfolio asset, valued only for its cash-generating potential. Workers were cost to be minimized. Heritage was irrelevant. The only metric that mattered was earnings per share. British politicians learned nothing from the scandal. Takeover laws remained unchanged. The Cadbury case led to endless parliamentary debates, white papers, and commissions. None produced meaningful reform. Today, a foreign company can still acquire a British firm, make promises, break them immediately, and face no legal consequences. The Cadbury workers learned that loyalty meant nothing. The pensioners who had given decades to the company discovered that their sacrifice bought them nothing but redundancy letters and cheaper chocolate. The British public learned that their childhood memories, their national brands, their industrial heritage could be sold to the highest bidder and dismantled for parts. Cadbury still exists. The name remains on purple wrappers in shops across Britain. But it is a ghost brand now, a hollow signifier with no connection to the values that created it. George Cadbury's statue still stands in Bourneville, bronze fingers pointing toward the factory he built. But he's pointing at something that no longer exists. The building stands. The machinery runs. The chocolate flows. But the heart is gone. In 2015, Mondelez reported global revenues of $29.8 billion. Irene Rosenfeld's total compensation that year was $21.1 million. She retired in 2017 with a pension worth $170 million. The 400 workers from Somerdale received an average redundancy payment of £14,000. Most never found equivalent employment. Some retrained. Some took early retirement. Some moved to Poland, following their jobs east. Nobody knows what happened to the original Cadbury recipe book, the leather-bound ledger containing formulas written in George Cadbury's own hand. It was last seen in 2009 in the archives at Bourneville. After the takeover, it vanished. Mondelez claims it was digitized. Archivists searched for it. Gone. A 150-year record of British confectionery innovation lost in a corporate acquisition. Perhaps it's in a warehouse somewhere in Illinois. Perhaps it was thrown away. Perhaps someone, realizing what it was, took it home for safekeeping. We'll never know. The past, like the chocolate recipe itself, has been altered beyond recognition. All that remains is the taste of what was lost.